In this video we're going to build a function that uses Django-Crontab to execute a task periodically every minute. And this function is going to fetch data from a cryptocurrency API and store that data in our database. So every minute we're going to get a fresh batch of data from the API. I'm going to store that in our database, and then that will be available in our application. So Django-Crontab is on GitHub here, and you can install it with the pip install Django-Crontab command. And then once you have installed it, the basic recipe is you add it to your installed apps, you create a cron function, and then you create a cronjobs setting within your settings.py file. And this setting is a list, and each list is a tuple containing the settings for all of the jobs that you've got defined. So the first parameter is the cron expression, which defines the schedule, and the second parameter will link you to the function you want to execute on that schedule. So we're going to dive into this in this video. Now, one important thing to note is that Django-Crontab only works with Unix systems. This is based off Unix technology. So if you're on Windows, this package will not work, but you can use it using Docker. Now, I'm on Windows, so I'm going to use Docker in this tutorial. There is a starter repository here, and you can grab the code from here. It's going to be linked in the description. And within that repository, you see there's a Docker file and a docker compose.yaml file. Now, I'm going to briefly walk through what these are in this video, but more information can be found on the blog post, which will also be linked in the description. Now, we'll walk through those in a second, but the API we're going to use is this one here. It's CoinMarketCap. This is for cryptocurrency prices. Now, when you're on this site, which will be linked in the description as well, you can click the Get Your API Key, and that will take you to a sign up page where you can actually get an API key. Now, this API key will take the form of a UUID, so sign up to this API to follow along with this tutorial, get your API key, and then what you want to do is clone this repository. And then once you've cloned the repository, if we cross over to VS Code here, at the root you can add a .env file, and this is going to contain your sensitive settings that you don't want to commit to GitHub. And what I've got here is a setting called CoinMarketCap key, which is set to the UUID that I got when I signed up. So store yours within a setting such as this one, and within the .getignore file you can see there's also a .env here, so this will not be committed to GitHub. And what we're eventually going to do here is we're going to use this API key to send requests using a cron function, and then the response data will be stored in the Django database. But before we do that, let's briefly walk through the Docker file. Now, Docker is a technology that allows you to set up containers, and these containers have an environment that's very specific to your application. So for example, you have a Python container, and that's what we extend here in our image that we're building. We extend a Python 3.8.6 image, and then we perform some commands here. And as I said, there's more detail in the blog post, but the essence of it is that we copy our application directory, which is this one containing our Django code. We copy that to the container. We copy our requirements.txt file to the container, and then we run the pip install command here, and that will install all of our Python dependencies within the Docker image that we're building here. And below that we create a file called django-cron.log, and this is where we're going to send our logging to this particular file here on the file system. And then finally at the bottom we are running this command. This is the command that's run when we start our container, and basically we start the cron daemon using the service cron start command, and then we run the Django development server on port 8000, and that's basically building a Docker image that can serve a Django application and contains all the requirements we've got within this requirements.txt file. Now, to actually run this, we will use Docker Compose. Docker Compose gives you a way to run multiple Docker services. In this case, we've only got a single service called web app, but we can run one command and it will have all of the correct configuration for your Docker container. There will be more detail about this in the blog, but we will show you now the command that you can run to set up your Docker container. And one important thing to note is that we're loading in the environment file, the .env file, into our environment here. This basically means that the settings we have in our .env file will be available within the Docker container as environment variables. So within our container, we'll have an environment variable called coin_marketCap_key. So with that, I'm going to stop talking about Docker and let's start by creating some settings. So let's go to the settings.py file. And what we're going to do firstly is we're going to create some settings for our API key. I'm going to import at the top the 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀 library. So let's import that and we'll go to the documentation here. This is a package that allows you to use 12-factor methodology to configure your Django application using environment variables. So basically any sensitive information that you don't want to have on your GitHub repository is stored in environment variables on your operating system, or in this case in the Docker container. And we can import environ and we can then reference those environment variables very easily. So if we go back to VS Code, we're going to set up an environment object here and it's going to be called env, and we'll just say environ.env. So this creates the object that is then capable of reading environment variables into your settings.py file. Now the environment variable we've used here is called coin_marketCap_key. So I'm going to copy that, and at the bottom of the settings.py file we'll create this setting here, and we're going to reference the env object that we've created and we'll pass to it the name of the environment variable within the file. So we're referencing env, which is this object we've created on line 4 here. And I'm also going to create another setting at the bottom here, and I'm just going to paste this in. It's going to be the API URL, and this is the coin_marketCap API URL. We can now reference this from the settings file, which is a little bit more maintainable and it's a better practice. So let's now start our Django application within Docker. To do that, I'm going to bring up a terminal here, and if we ls the contents of this directory, you see that we have this Docker compose file that was briefly mentioned. To run the Django application, we can simply run the docker compose up command, and that will start up the Docker container for our Django application. And you can see here it's started on port 8000, so we should now be able to navigate to port 8000 on the browser. And if I load that up, you see we get our page here with some lorem ipsum text. So we're going to change what's going on this application by creating a Django-Crontab command in just a second. Now in order to fetch data from coin_marketCap's API, we need to attach an HTTP header that has our API token. So basically if we go to the documentation here, we have a preferred method for authentication, and that's to attach this header to your HTTP request. And if you attach that header, the value should be the API key that you got earlier on in this process. So let's quickly demonstrate how to fetch data from coin_marketCap's API using this header here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into the Django container and get into the Python shell. So to do that, we use a command called docker exec, and we specify -ti, and then we put the name of the container as another argument. So within the Docker compose file, you see that the container name is Django-Crypto. So if I paste that in there, you can then execute any arbitrary commands within the container, such as ls. And if I execute that, you get the output from the container's working directory. So what we want to do is we want to get access to the Django shell. So manage.py, I'm going to use the shell plus command from Django extensions, and that's installed and added to your installed apps. So that gives you access within the container to the Django shell, and there's more detail on the docker exec command on the blog post, and a link will be placed in the description as well. So now that we're in the shell, we're going to execute some commands. So I'm going to import the requests package, and then we're going to send an API request to coin_marketCap. Now firstly, let's verify that our settings.cmc API key has properly loaded in this key using Django-Environ. Now we've set this up just a second ago, and we can see that it's fetching the correct key from our .env file. So we've got that. We now need to attach it as an API header, and I'm going to paste in the dictionary that we're going to use for this. You can see that that key there will match the key defined by coin_marketCap's documentation. So now that we've got the key, we can send the request to coin_marketCap. So let's say we have a variable called response, and it's going to be equal to requests.get, and the API URL is going to be the URL we stored within settings.py, this one here, so we can reference that with settings.api URL. And we need to attach the headers that we set up, that dictionary here, so we'll put that in as a parameter to requests.get. If we send that, we should then get a response, which we can check the status code, and we see that we get a 200 response, so that indicates successful response. And because this is an API, we're getting JSON data back, so we can say response.json. This is a function on response objects in the requests library, and that will convert our data to JSON. And if I look at the keys within this, because it's a dictionary, you'll see we get two keys. We have a status and the data itself. So I'm going to index into that at the data, and we're going to get the very first response here. So this is the first response. It's not particularly readable, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to import the pprint function from the pprint module. This is shorthand for pretty printing, which will help give us a more readable way to look at this data. If I go back to what we printed out here and we pass it to the pprint function, we should now be able to see this in slightly better form. So we get data such as the name of the cryptocurrency, which is Bitcoin in this case. We get the date that this was added to the coin market cap system, and importantly we have this quote field here which contains the US dollar values such as the price here. Now this is what we're going to extract and store in our database. So what we're going to do in a second is create models from this data, but this is just a demonstration that we can perform the request and we get back a response. But all we need to do is attach our API key to the headers of the HTTP request. So we're going to build this code into our cron function in a second. But before we can build the cron function, we need models so that we can store the results in the database. So let's go to our models.py file, and I'm going to make this a little bit smaller here. And we're going to build a model called crypto, and that's going to inherit from models.model in this case. And we're going to store two pieces of data on this model here, the name of the cryptocurrency and also its symbol. So for example, the symbol of Bitcoin is BTC. We're going to store that information in the crypto table, and we also need a table for the prices of the cryptocurrencies. The reason we need a separate table is that we're going to store multiple prices for each cryptocurrency, and every minute our crontab command will fetch new prices and store them. So we need a crypto price table as well, which I'm going to copy and paste in here. And this crypto price model contains three fields. Firstly, it has a foreign key to its parent crypto. So for example, if this was a price for Bitcoin, it would have a reference to Bitcoin in the crypto table. We also have the price here, which is a float field, and that will store the price at a given timestamp, which is a date time field. So these are the three fields we need in our database. We're now going to make the migrations. So let me exit out of the Django shell here. And remember, we need to, when we execute these Django commands, we need to actually do it in the Docker container. That's a side effect of using Docker, so you just need to run the docker exec command. So rather than manage.py shell plus, I'm going to run manage.py make migrations, and that should make the migrations for our core application here, and it creates these two models that we've just defined within the models.py file. And after running the make migrations command, all we need to do is run the migrate command after that, and it will create the tables within our database. And we can verify that these tables have been created by going to our database.sqlite file and the open database. Now you need to have a SQLite extension installed on VS Code, but if you've got that, you can then look at the tables that have been created. And one of them here is the crypto table with our two columns. Now we don't have any rows at the moment, but we are going to insert data in a second using a Django-Crontab function. So close that off just now, and let's get started with using Django-Crontab. Now the first thing to do is we'll go back to settings.py, and to our installed apps list at the top, we're going to add the Django-Crontab package, Django-Crontab in there. Now this is already installed within our Docker environment because we have in the requirements.txt file the Django-Crontab package is specified, and within our Docker file we ran the pip install, so that's going to be available to use. So we can add Django-Crontab to our installed apps. The second step here is to create a file called cron.py. So within our core application, we create a cron.py file. And I'm going to paste some imports in this file. We're going to import the settings from Django, which we're going to use to reference the API URL and the API key. We're importing the requests module, which is going to be used to perform the HTTP request to the CoinMarketCap API. And we're also importing the two models that we've just created. Now within here we define functions, and these functions are executed periodically by Django-Crontab. So these are just normal Python functions. So I'm going to call this function fetch crypto prices, and to that what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste some of the code we used in the shell earlier on, We set up the headers as a dictionary, and then we perform the GET request to the CoinMarketCap API, and we attach the header for our authentication. And then we get the data by converting the response to JSON and extracting that data key from the response dictionary. So now that we have the data, which contains an entry for each cryptocurrency, what we're going to do is store that data in our database. So we need a for loop, and we're going to say for currency in data. And for each currency, we're going to extract a few fields. Now I'm going to paste this code in here. We get the name of the cryptocurrency, we get the symbol, and we also get the price, which we need to do some nested calls to inner dictionaries here. And we can understand more about why we're doing this nesting here by looking at a sample response from CoinMarketCap. Now, one particular entry will have a name and a symbol, that's Bitcoin and BTC in this sample, but we want to get the price here, which is found here. So we need to get the quote dictionary, and then within that we get the US dollar key, and then within that we get the price. Now that's why we have this nested structure here. We're getting the quote, then we get the US dollar in our dictionary, and from there we get the price. So we have to do some nesting there, but once we've got that data, what we're going to do is create the models associated with that data. Now below here I'm going to print out these to our log file. This is going to go straight to our Django-Crontab log file, and below that what we're going to do is we're going to take the model crypto that we created, which has two fields, the name and the symbol, and within our cron job we're going to say if the name and symbol that we've got from the API, if that doesn't already exist in the database, we're going to create that particular model. So the command that we use to do that is crypto.objects.get or create, and to that we pass the fields that we want to create if they don't already exist, and we set the name and the symbol accordingly based on what we have extracted on lines 15 and 16 here from the API response. Let's store that in a variable called crypto, and the reason we use get or create is because we want to avoid duplication in our model here, in our table, because if we have Bitcoin already stored with its symbol BTC, we don't want to create another entry for that, so we use get or create, and get or create actually returns a tuple which has two elements. The first element is the object itself, which is what we want, so index in at 0 here. The second element of that tuple is a boolean that indicates whether or not the object was created in the database or just retrieved. So now we have the crypto object. We now want to create the associated price for this particular timestamp when we execute the cron command. So to do that, we're going to go down and we're going to create a crypto price object, and it's going to be cryptoprice.objects.create, and we pass to that the crypto that we have retrieved here on line 21, which remember in the models is a foreign key to this particular model here. So we attach that with the crypto parameter, and we also want to pass the price in here, and we've extracted the price on line 17, so we can pass that in here. And if we save that, if we go back to models.py here, we have a timestamp, but it has this auto now add feature, and that basically means that whenever a crypto price model is created for the first time, if we don't specify explicitly what the timestamp should be, it will automatically create that in the database for us based on the current time. And the reason we use create here and not get or create is because this is a new data that we're fetching from the API for a given timestamp. So the price might have changed, it might still be the same. We're going to be fetching this data every minute, so the data should change from the API. And this allows us to build up a historical record of all of the prices for each cryptocurrency over time. So we can get the current price, but we can also build graphs and analysis later on of historical prices. And that's our entire Django-Crontab function here. We're going to execute this every minute, and it's going to save new data to our database. If we go back to the documentation for Django-Crontab, which is up here, we see that we now need to add a setting to our settings.py, and that's the cronjobs setting here. So let's go to our settings.py file, and at the bottom we will add a setting called cronjobs, and it's going to be a list here. And to that list we pass a bunch of tuples. Now in this case we only have one as well. We have one function, but you can set up as many cron functions as you want. So we're going to set up one that's going to run every single minute. And the first element of this tuple is the schedule. Now this is a cron expression, and to run something every minute we put 5 stars here like that. And the second parameter is a link to the function that we want to run on that particular schedule. So to link to that function we specify the Django application. So our application is called core, so it's going to be core.cron, and cron references this file that we've created, cron.py. And finally, we reference the function that we are actually calling on the schedule. So it's going to be called fetch crypto prices, and that matches this particular function name here. So this function will be called every single minute by Django-Crontab. Now there's also an optional third parameter which I'm going to paste in here, and this basically says any output should be redirected to our django-cron.log file. This log file is actually created within our Docker file, which specifies the Docker image, and you can see it on lines 17 and 18 here. First of all, we create a directory in the container called /cron, and to that directory we add a file called django-cron.log. This is optional, but this file exists within our container and we link to it here. It's /cron/django-cron.log, and this syntax here means append the output to that file. So copy that if you want to see the output within the file. So with that, we need to set up one final setting, and I'm going to paste this in below. Now this is an optional setting for Django-Crontab. If we go back to the documentation and scroll down a little bit, it's called crontab command prefix, and it's specified here. And this is something you do or declare before each job gets executed, and it's a good place to attach environment variables to the cron job. Now we need to do this for some reason, I'm not sure why, but we say coin market cap key is equal to the setting that we've got up here. And the reason for this, again, I'm not sure about this, but it basically ensures that our Django-Crontab expression has access to this environment variable here. So make sure you add that setting to your settings.py file. Now the final thing we need to do, if we go back to the documentation again, this is the last thing we need to do to set this up. Now Django-Crontab ships with some custom management commands, and the one we want to execute is the python manage.py crontab add, and that will actually schedule these tasks on the operating system for you. Now we need to do this through Docker, so I'm going to use the docker exec ti, and the container name's Django/crypto, and we'll paste in the command we want to execute within the container here, and it's python manage.py crontab add. And once you execute that, it'll add our cron job to the operating system's cron tab. So basically every single minute, based on this schedule, you will execute this function, and this will then call this function here, and it will save these objects to the database based on the response from the CoinMarketCap API. So how do we check if this is working? Well, we can check what's going on in the log file here. Now in the settings.py we set up output to this log. We can execute another command in the Docker container to check what is actually being output in this log file. So let's execute this command, docker exec Django crypto, and the command we're executing is the cat command to the log file. And Unix systems cat will output the contents of a particular file. So if we output that, or if we execute that, we see we're now getting these cryptocurrencies being printed out in this file, and that corresponds to the print statement on line 19 here, where we print the name of the cryptocurrency, its symbol, and its price. And you can see the names of some of these. I've never heard of them, but we have SushiSwap, sushi as the symbol, and this is the price of the cryptocurrency. So we're getting the log output, which is promising. That means that hopefully we're now saving these objects to the database. So to check that, what I'm going to do is open up the database file here using this extension. If you open the database, we should now be able to see what's in the crypto table. Beforehand it was empty, but now we see we're actually collecting these cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin into this table. So I think we have 50 of them, and what I can also do is look at the crypto price table. Now this stores the prices of the cryptocurrencies at a given timestamp or a given date time, and it references a foreign key to the crypto ID here. So we're actually now storing this data, and we should find that every minute we have another bunch of records being added to this table. So that's pretty cool. Let's now see this on the front end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a very basic page here. So close off SQLite here, and we're going to add data to the view that we've got. Now, as we've seen before, the actual page that we're dealing with here has some lorem ipsum, and that's served by a view here called index. We're going to add the data to this index for Bitcoin. So I'm going to say Bitcoin equals crypto.objects.get, and we're going to get the cryptocurrency with the name of Bitcoin. That should return that to us, but first of all, of course, from our models we need to import the crypto model here, and we're also going to import crypto price while we're at it. And now that we have Bitcoin, we can also get all of the prices associated with Bitcoin. So prices equals, and it's going to be crypto price.objects.filter, and we're going to filter down only to the prices that are associated with Bitcoin here. So the foreign key needs to reference Bitcoin in that case. So that line should give us the prices for Bitcoin. I'm then going to add these to my context with a key of currency linking to Bitcoin and crypto prices with the prices here, and we can add that context as a third parameter to render here. And if we save that, we should now go to our template for the index.html, and I'm going to replace the lorem ipsum text with some new content. So let's paste in some HTML here, and we'll format that a little bit here. So it's the prices for the given currency, and the currency is passed in here, and it's going to be Bitcoin. And then we create a UL tag here which has a for loop. So for every price in those crypto prices that we're fetching here, we are going to print that price out to the page using a list tag. So if we save that and actually go to the front end, which remember should still be running, and that's running through Docker here. And while it's running, by the way, we're also fetching every minute new data using Django-Crontab. So we can now go to the front end again and refresh this page. And we now see that we're getting some prices for Bitcoin here. And this is fetching new data regularly, and it's updating the database. So if we refresh that after a minute, we should see new results coming in as we've seen there. And basically every minute we'll get new data for Bitcoin, the new price of the cryptocurrency, and we'll store that in a database. So as a final bonus to this video, as everyone knows, I love HTMX, and we're going to add a very basic bit of HTMX to this application so that the update happens without any refreshing being required. And I'm going to use Django-HTMX to do this. So let's add this to our installed apps. This is actually available in the container because we added Django-HTMX to the requirements which were installed in the Docker file. So in our settings.py file, we can add Django-HTMX to installed apps here. And now we have to add some middleware, and we can get that from the documentation for Django-HTMX. We add the middleware, and we can add that anywhere we want within this middleware setting. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use HTMX polling capabilities to poll the backend every 60 seconds. Remember, the cron job runs every 60 seconds, so we should get new data every 60 seconds. So let's go back to our index.html template, and we're going to wire up the HTMX attributes to this UL tag. It's going to be hxget, and we're going to specify the index URL that we've defined here, URL index, and that will link to this particular view here. It's called index, and it calls the view that we've been working with here. And we're going to be polling the backend every 60 seconds, so I'm going to paste this in here, and the every event will basically allow you to poll the backend at a particular time interval, and we specify 60 seconds here. So every 60 seconds, HTMX will send a request to our index endpoint, and what we're going to do is we're going to use Django-HTMX here to render a different response if it's an HTMX request. Currently we render the entire index.html, but what we're going to do instead is just replace the inner list elements with the new data. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to set up an if statement, if request.htmx, and if that's true, we know it's a request that's coming from HTMX. And rather than linking to a partial, I'm going to try and construct a HTTP response directly here. So it's going to be a string response, and we need to import the HTTP response from django.http. So from django.http, import HTTP response, and within this HTTP response we're going to loop over all of the prices within this particular query set here of crypto price objects, and we're going to render a list element for each one of them and return that as a string. So because we're looping, let's set up a list comprehension to begin with, and we'll loop for p in prices here. And remember, prices is defined on line 9. And for each price, what we want to do is we're going to render an f string here, and it's going to be an li tag that contains the p.price. So we'll close off the li tag. So basically what that means is that for every price within our crypto prices, we're going to render out that price within an li tag. Remember, these crypto price objects, they have a field called price. It's a float field, so we can actually render that out within the list element here. So that's our list comprehension there, but the HTTP response class here, it expects a string, not a list, so we need to join that up. So we use the string.join method, and we can join that up like that. Just close that off with some brackets. So that takes every element that we've got within the list, which will be an li tag for each price, and it will then join it up into a string. So that will return that to the front end, which will then be swapped into this ul tag into the inner HTML. So it will replace what's defined in this for loop. So this is actually an alternative to defining a fragment. Instead, you return a Python expression directly that's a string, and it contains the markup you need for your front end. So let's now save that and go back to the front end, and we will refresh the page here. Now we see we've collected quite a bit more data here, and that's because our cron job is running every single minute and it's gathering the prices for Bitcoin. But now we've got HTMX on the front end, so we should expect every minute this to be replaced and a new price to be added. So let's see if that's going to happen now. And you can see that without any refreshing of the page, that has actually popped up there with a new price. That's because our cron job has run in the background. It's fetched new data, and HTMX is fetching that with this polling request, and it's returning this list of elements here for every price, which is then swapped in, and that contains all of these prices. So every minute when a new price gets added, that will be appended to the end of this particular list. So that's everything for this video. We've demonstrated quite a few things in this video. We have seen how to use Docker with Django. We have seen how to use django-environ to load in an environment file, a .env file, and reference variables within that. We've seen how to set up Django-Crontab to execute functions with a particular schedule so you can perform actions periodically using Django. And finally, we've seen very briefly how to use HTMX to update the front end. That's just a small addendum to this video, but it's always useful to throw in some front end stuff as well. As a final note before you go, remember that this script is executing every single minute, so this will quickly fill up your database with data, and that's fine if you're only running this for an hour or so, but over time this will collect a lot of data, so be mindful when you're running scripts every single minute to collect data. For many applications you can run scripts much less frequently. For example, you could run a script at midnight every night to clear out some data from your system, anything like that. Django-Crontab is very flexible, and there's actually an excellent site called crontab.guru. Let's go there just now before we end the video, and this allows you to play around with crontab syntax, and you can define expressions. For example, this expression here will execute at 4:05 in the morning, and that will execute every single day, every month, and every day of the week. So you can set up these schedules, and it's very flexible. What we've got is the schedule that has all stars, which executes at every single minute, and you can use other syntax such as these step values here. So for example, if you wanted to execute every second minute, you could do this, every 10th minute, and you could do the same for the hours, so every second hour. These are very flexible, and I'll link this site in the description. But that's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Check out the blog post if you want more information on Docker and Django-Crontab. If you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. There's many more Django videos coming up. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.